Now, I think we're live. Okay. It's a little, that's better. Okay. Hello. We're back. Hello, Instagram. Hello, YouTube. Um, Today we're going to be talking a little bit about liver health. Now, this is really important because the liver is it's the organ I think that interacts with what's going on outside of the body because everything kind of has to go through it at one point or another. And we talk a lot about gut health. We talk a lot about, a variety of different health um, problems and issues that go on. But the thing is, the brunt of what goes on a lot of the times is really going to kind of come through what's going on with the liver. And we kind of have to talk about it and understand it in a little bit greater detail because I think this is where things kind of get caught up and where there's a lot of confusion. Now, there's a lot of different organs that work in conjunction with the liver. There's a gut liver axis that is connected via a portal system. Now, if you look up your portal veins or portal venous system, this is essentially drainage from things that get absorbed from the villi, from the intestines. Those go in to, they lead to the liver where the liver can do its thing, detoxify, sort things out, things that kind of have to go through are going to have to do its thing. There's also a another pathway where again the liver is going to filter out and clean out the blood too. So there's sort of like a relationship between the spleen, between the liver, and between the kidneys as well. So they all kind of work as a filtration system where when the liver's kind of running properly, we're able to detoxify a bunch of the different things we need to. And the cleaner our blood is, the easier the job that our liver is going to have. When the blood is not clean, essentially, we're going to have some issues down the road. And when I mean that the liver detoxifies everything, I mean literally everything. So there are toxins that come from they're essentially end products of metabolism. So when we absorb food through the intestinal villi, those go through the portal system, they go to the liver. And at that point, the liver has to kind of deal with them appropriately. There's also toxins from anything and everything that we kind of consume. So when this comes to medications, you have whether they're prescription, over the counter, recreational, all of those have to be detoxified. So to some degree. So even if you're taking, in Tylenol or anything like that, that all kind of has to go through and get detoxified on the back end. So remember that, if there are any sort of exogenous chemicals that are coming in, they're going to have to be detoxified and taken care of. That's going to use resources down the road. And we'll go over some of those resources a little later. But you have to understand that there's always going to be not only a risk benefit, but also, what are you willing to do in the short term at the potential expense of long term? Outside of that, again, these are going to be all things you ingest. So you have to remember there's agricultural issues. We a big thing came out on glyphosate around, I think 80% of urine samples they found within both kids and adults found that glyphosate tested positive in those urine samples. So not so great. There's also other issues when you're talking about food additives. Here's a crazy statistic. When we're talking about toxins, if we go back 50 or 60 years ago, 80% of the food that is on your grocery store shelves did not exist. So I know we love talking about, we go down into, heavy metals and mercury and cadmium and lead, and these are issues. And no doubt, no need to minimize them, but you have to understand that all these different additives and preservatives put into foods that are then you're then told that they have vitamins when they're really just synthetic derivatives put back in and enriched in these foods. You have to understand that is where these toxins come from, and the liver has to take that brunt and process it effectively. So the higher stress, the more pollutants, the more contaminants, the more herbicides, the more pesticides, the more additives, the more that has to do just to come through. And bear in mind, again, this is a zero-sum game, right? So, the less nutrient-rich food you're absorbing, generally those tend to be the foods with the higher toxic load, but also they tend to be the most nutrient depleted foods. So not only are you adding to the toxic load, you're not actually giving the raw materials the liver needs to do its thing. So got to understand it that way. So let's talk a little bit about phase one, phase two. So there are two primary phases of liver detoxification. And then there's a third phase, which is essentially just excretion. So once phase two is completed with liver detox, you either end up with two things. Toxins end up in the blood in the serum, and those are eventually excreted via urine, or they end up in the bile, which goes through the liver. And at that point, it's going to go into the bile that gets excreted into the digestive tract. After you go down into the digestive tract, it gets released via stool, which is why bowel movements are important. So a lot of these things come full circle. Now, really important here because there's two different phases and they both kind of do different things and they're both always working, but the thing is the pace at which they work can change kind of depending on where you're at and what you're doing. So in phase one, really what the liver is going to do is trying to take fat soluble toxins and turn them into water soluble ones that can be excreted via bile and stool or urine. That's essentially high level kind of what's going on. So with that, with phase one, really the goal of phase one is to start transitioning into a water soluble molecule. And you need a lot of different cofactors. You need things like vitamins B2, B3, B6, B9, which is folate, which comes from green veggies. B12 is huge, glutathione. Different amino acids are really important for this, different flavonoids, and different lipids, different phospholipids. You also need your antioxidants here because this is really important. So what happens in between phase one and phase two, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but it makes these molecules more able to be detoxified, to be conjugated through phase two so that they can be excreted. But there's an intermediate metabolite compound that's formed in between phase one and phase two that is ironically sometimes more damaging than the initial toxin itself. And this is where antioxidants are super important to reduce and prevent a lot of that oxidative damage. This is why I talk so much about vitamins A, C, and E, selenium, zinc. Those are the big ones, but big ones that play a role as well are things like CoQ10, copper, manganese, magnesium, different flavonoids. This is why things like astaxanthin are really good. Things like milk thistle, really, really helpful. And then we get to phase two, where we take those toxic intermediaries and then change them into something water soluble so that they can be excreted. And there's a few different pathways. So glutathione is important for one of these pathways, which is glutathione conjugation, but there's glucuronidation, there's acetylation, there's amino acid conjugation, which means you need a variety of different proteins that have different amino acids, like glycine, like taurine, like glutamine, like arginine. Methylation is really important. We've talked about the methylation cycle, so you can go watch that. Sulfation, so sulfur-containing foods, your cruciferous vegetables, garlic, onion, all those different types of sulfur-containing foods are really, really, really important. So again, at the crux of all these different organs and different systems, kind of the liver is kind of in the middle of all of this, kind of covering its bases, doing its thing. And again, we just have a high toxic load living in the environment we live in today. So, on average, according to the EPA in the US, over 700 chemicals are in a person's body at any given time. And again, when that exposure is high, when we're talking about different chemicals, we talked about different heavy metals like lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium. It's not surprising that we see things like Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, cancer on the rise. So this kind of brings us into the sugar part of this, because this is kind of really important to understand too. So glucose we know now that fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver, is now the number one primary disease associated with the liver. It used to be alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now it's actually non-alcoholic, and we tend to go blame sugar independently on this. And we need to make a distinction here. So it's important to understand this. So I want to get this out of the way. So glucose is something that we need, that literally every cell in our body uses. It is the preferred fuel source in the body. So where this comes from is really important. There's also a difference when it comes to fructose. Now, you might have heard of fructose. Now, it becomes particularly a problem because of the creation of high fructose corn syrup, which is in a lot of processed foods that we see. You're talking about, a lot of sweets, candies, sodas. A lot of processed foods are going to have high fructose corn syrup. You'll see it abbreviated as HFCS. So that thing is brutal. You have to understand that the liver takes on 100% of the brunt of fructose, and when it's super concentrated in an unnatural form like high fructose corn syrup, that leads to real issues. And in fact, there are studies now that show that even if you have one sugary drink a day that includes high fructose corn syrup, that is enough to increase your risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That's it. One drink a day. Oh, let me get that off. And when that brunt is taken on, if it can't all be conjugated properly, it turns into fat in the liver, hence leading to fatty liver disease. So that essentially is the mechanism when it comes to fructose. And where that fructose comes from is really important. For example, if you're getting it from whole fruits, where it's packaged with bioflavonoids and fiber and other nutrients that are going to play a role, ironically, in helping in detoxification, we don't tend to see the same issues that we have when we're taking this sort of synthetic, kind of put together high fructose corn syrup that is hyper concentrated and essentially thrown into the system to kind of throw things off. So this can lead to issues down the road. And you have to understand that digestion is going to play a role here because these are super simple sugars. They don't take a very long time to be broken down, which means they enter the bloodstream really quickly and can flood the system, i.e. the liver, very quickly too. So all of these nutrients that I mentioned before are really, really vitally important when it comes to liver function. And when we don't have those and the liver's not functioning properly, we get all those downstream effects. It's not just necessarily liver health that gets affected. It could be bone and muscle growth. It could be, it could be brain health. It could be your ability to form new blood cells, red blood cells, different white blood cells, neurological function, reproductive health, hormones, glucose metabolism. So all of this can be affected how this kind of all works. Energy levels, circadian rhythms can all be affected. So when it comes to the digestive system, you have to remember there are these villi, which are essentially like finger-like projections that kind of protrude into the abdomen. And in between, on each of these villi, are actually even more protrusions known as microvilli. And these are responsible for essentially absorbing things from the small intestine to go into the liver. Now, these can be filtered. And again, nutrients, things that can help you, toxins from prescription medications, from environmental toxins, from food additives, all of this is going to end up going to the liver in one way or another. So all of that is going to end up flowing there. And the liver has to work with it and deal with it properly. So detoxification is kind of always going on based on that digestive process, but also is working with red blood cells that are kind of cycling through as well. So there's a lot going on with the liver and a lot that's going on. Now, to come back to what we were talking about before with phase 1 and phase 2, is we have Cytochrome P450, also known as sometimes CP450, which is kind of a group of around 100 enzymes or so that are responsible for transforming these fat soluble toxins into water soluble ones so we can get rid of them like we talked about. So we kind of went over the mechanism of it, but I want to talk a little bit about the balance. So again, phase one and phase two are kind of always running, but if they're not in imbalance with each other, it could lead to issues. So for example, like if you have a rapidly moving phase one, but a slow performing phase two, what happens? This can lead to a buildup of those harmful intermediates, could deplete some of those antioxidant stores, and actually those toxins will end up getting recycled in the blood, and your liver will have to detoxify them again, which is not great at the end of the day. So, and certain things can affect phase one here. So there are things like alcohol consumption, nicotine consumption, taking acetaminophen, iron deficiency, and excessive protein can affect kind of this phase one here. So, or this phase one, phase two balance. So, kind of really important. There are certain things that can slow down phase one too. So, this could be deficiencies in certain vitamins like A and C. Taking antihistamines often, refined carbohydrates is going to slow it down. Toxins that are given off from different bacteria and viruses, sometimes endotoxins, because those have to be detoxified too. Different drugs can also it also can happen too. Things like diazepam are going to slow this down. So the question is to kind of find the balance between the two. In terms of phase two, also things can alter phase two function. So um, you also need to make sure you're having things like glutathione, SAMe, which is also kind of a big player in the methylation cycle. It's going to play a role in your ability to go through phase two as well as certain vitamins like folate, like B6, like B12, that it plays a role in homocysteine production. So this all kind of coalesces and comes together. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Now, there's also like a Chinese medicine approach that comes to liver in terms of like how, things can come up, how you can kind of see things or pick up on things that might be going on with you or someone you might know. Now, there are certain emotions that are associated with liver dysfunction. So I can actually show you. I have a chart right here, so I can just kind of go through it. But I'll share it here. So in the green, when you're talking about, again, traditional Chinese medicine, the wood element, this green element, uh, the liver is associated with the wood element, and the emotions associated with it, if you could see that over here, are things like anger and resentment. So if you tend to hold on to anger, if you tend to get angered easily, and you're not processing those emotions properly, if you don't have an outlet, if you're not talking that out with other people, this could be a sign that something is going on with your liver, or that it might be involved in something. Now, when it comes to blood tests, you're going to usually see things like ALT, AST, sometimes alkaline phosphatase. When these get high and out of range, usually that's already a sign that liver damage is being done. There are some other markers that you can look for, sometimes like homocysteine or high sensitive C-reactive protein, and some others to kind of get some more to put together some pieces kind of before that, to be like, oh, hey, the liver might be being pushed in, or you might be leaning towards where liver damage could become a thing. Once ALT and AST are high, that kind of means that damage is already happening, which we can get back under control, but that it's a little bit later stage. So just kind of something to be aware of, when you're getting blood work done. So kind of really important to keep that in mind. But going back to the kind of Chinese medicine aspect of it, so that is something that's really worth kind of being aware of. So if you tend to get angered easily, if you tend to hold on to that, or are resentful, that can be a sign that your liver might be stagnant, your gallbladder might be stagnant, you're not getting rid of or producing enough bile to excrete it properly or at a sufficient rate. So there's a lot of different things kind of going on with the liver that is really, really useful. Now, in terms of things that you can do in terms of liver cleansing, there are some really, really good ones. The really ways to go about it. Now, the biggest and clearest one is eliminating high fructose corn syrup, processed foods, processed sugars as best as possible. Um, this is going to be the fastest way to kind of bring those liver enzymes back down into normal ranges and really start getting to a point where you can start healing the liver. Now, obviously, like I mentioned, we need a variety of different antioxidants and nutrients. So, again, vitamins A, C, and E, selenium, zinc, different minerals like manganese, magnesium, copper. There's a variety of them that you're going to need for the liver to kind of do its thing. And that's kind of the baseline support that you might need. Again, different bioflavonoids, so a variety of different colored fruits and vegetables, and including fruits, particularly if they're whole fruits, not processed fruits, gonna go a long way. Sulfur containing foods are really important. Garlic, onions, cruciferous vegetables, things like kale, crucifers like cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. You can Google a list. There's tons of them. Certain foods are good for like glutathione too, like asparagus. So that's really good as well. So all of these are things that we want to kind of incorporate more. Another thing that's really important with liver is obviously making sure that those pathways are open so that you can excrete these toxins. So what does that mean? That means we have really good kidney function so that we can excrete urine. It means that we're having bowel movements at least once a day, which is going to mean having adequate fiber intake, making sure you're getting a variety of different movements in to kind of keep that moving. You may need prokinetics with something like ginger. That's really useful to kind of get the bowels moving. But if you're not going to the bathroom at least once a day, um, that is something worth working on to kind of help optimize those drainage pathways. And again, those drainage pathways are going to be the kidneys, are going to be the liver and gallbladder, which lead into the digestive tract. So if that's not going, it's going to be an issue when it kind of gets backed up. So that's the first thing that I work with people. And if that's something you want to work on with me, get in touch with me through DMs or email to kind of get those pathways open so that we can again get to a point where we can start healing. So that's kind of really crucial is to affect that if that's not working. Okay, that's a lot. Stress is another big thing. Now, we talked about this when it comes to anger, resentment. That's going to mean you're holding on to some certain emotions, certain triggers. So, whether it's affirmations, whether it's having a conversation with that person, whether it's exercise or getting out in nature or grounding or affirmations, something that can help get you out of that angered state is going to be really useful. And that's going to be contextually different for every person based on kind of, their situation. You have to be in a position, in a mindset where you're actually ready to heal. And there are a lot of limiting beliefs out there where if you're telling yourself, you can't do it or you're not good enough or you don't deserve it or I can't change or someone's going to not like me because um I want to get better myself and that's going to affect my, social status. Those are real concerns and those are real. And sometimes, it as humans, we are social beings. So, it's really tricky when it gets to that because sometimes the fear of being alone is actually more it stimulates that stress response to a point where that someone might not be at a point where they're ready to be like, hey, I want to be radically healthy, I want to change my life, I need to not do things that the majority of people do, and you have to be willing to do that. But a support system is really crucial. So if you can find someone or a group of people or maybe it's even someone online that you can really communicate with, there are groups out there, there are people out there, there are practitioners out there that can be kind of coaches and guides and cheerleaders to a degree, to help in that process because there is going to be a social component when you're talking about radically changing your health for the better. We live in a country, at least here in the U.S., where 88 or so percent of people are considered metabolically unhealthy. which means you're talking about only one in about every 10 people are. And that already makes you a black sheep. So if you have to some degree get to a point where you're willing to talk about what you're doing, try to get people more involved and excited about you changing, and then working on different, strategies that you can improve while not potentially giving up 100% your social life. And that's going to be different for every situation. Okay. Last thing I want to cover is some herbs that are really useful. I have a long list here, so bear with me when it comes to liver health. Now, granted, I would not take all of these generally when it comes to herbs in general. I find cycling them is really important. So, like a lot of different things, you can potentially, build up a resistance to something over time. So, cycling through them, taking a break, using food ideally would be the best, and incorporating some of these, kind of as you go, really important. But as a general rule, what are really going to help for detoxification, I like all different culinary spices. They're all going to have their own kind of play. Cloves are always a big one. Turmeric's a big one. Ginger, but other spices too are all going to play a role. Now, in terms of the herbs, chlorella spirulina, always really helpful for liver health, really good for heavy metal binding too. And that's a whole separate topic we can get into. Burdock root's really good. Cilantro, really good as a heavy metal binder too. Parsley is really good for liver health, but also really good as a kidney cleanser. So really good for kidney health, along with astragalus. So astragalus is really good for optimizing kind of kidney function. Again, making sure we're excreting things as we kind of need to. Chaga is one of the highest antioxidant. When we're talking about ORAC scores, chaga has one of the highest numbers on the planet. So chaga is really helpful as an antioxidant, and we need obviously antioxidants for our liver to function properly. Green tea is really good. Dandelion, clover. I said cloves, but licorice can be really useful, really good for a variety of different gut issues, especially as DGL. It can be useful to help soothe the stomach or help in the repair process of the gut. So DGL definitely has its usage as well. We talked about the sulfur-containing foods, crucifers, ginger, but also ginseng, ginkgo biloba, turkey tail, schisandra, red cleavers, things like black cumin seed, artichoke, mint. So you got a lot there. A lot of options. There's plenty of different blends. And again, I think cycling through different things is very useful every so often. That's kind of what I got on liver today. So I hope that's helpful. Again, liver health is super, super important. It's one of my favorite topics to cover because, you know, kind of everything has to go through there in some way. So sometimes getting those fundamental building blocks right will allow the body to do what it needs to heal itself. So if you're looking for more support, if you want to hop on with me, I still have a few slots open. I'm taking a few new clients. So you can get in touch with me on IG in the DMs or shoot me an email, drvincentesposito@gmail.com. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you guys soon.